Well, Monroe County Community School Corporation is exploring a new policy to counter and prevent racial discrimination. It published a first draft of its racial equity policy this week. The draft marked a milestone in a process that began in May when a group of students spoke out about their experiences with racism in schools. Patrick McGurr has more.
Standing before the school board and MCCSC leadership in May, the students shared accounts of racist behavior from classmates and staff.
I've experienced many instances of racial discrimination during my years as a student in MCCSC schools. I have felt powerless and as if there's nothing meaningful I can do to change what is happening.
The students said they wanted a policy that would stand firmly against racism in MCCSC schools and sufficiently punish offenders. Bloomington High School North senior Sabra Wagner was one of the students who spoke in May and went back to the board in June.
I think for me, at least, feeling that this policy would be able to support me if something else were to happen, and that I'd feel safer and knowing that something would happen as a result.
School corporation leaders promised to act and pledged to give students a voice in creating a new policy.
So the student engagement piece was a really big priority for us in terms of making sure that student voice was at the forefront of this work. And so we've had a number of sessions of our students to be able to hear their thoughts, their ideas, their perspectives, their concerns, the challenges that they've experienced.
Bloomington High School South sophomore Sydney Crossley spoke at the May meeting and has since served as a student equity ambassador.
I just really wanted to be a voice for my peers. I also have younger siblings, and I know that they've already experienced racism at like a really young age, and I'm willing to do anything in my power to make them feel comfortable and safe.
Crossley had the chance to speak to district teachers about issues of race this fall. She says the talk with teachers went particularly well.
I think that has probably been the best meeting, and I've probably had the biggest voice in that meeting.
The stated purpose of the policy that emerged this week, quote, is to confront, mitigate, and eliminate racism, racist behaviors, and microaggressions in all forms. The policy charges Superintendent Jeff Oswald or a designee to carry out 6 directives, ranging from training staff to avoid bias and practice inclusive approaches, to establishing a simple and safe system to report incidents of racism, to hiring more diverse teachers to reflect the student population. Students at this week's meeting still had concerns. Wagner says she worries about a lack of details about enforcement or punishment in the policy as written.
I was really happy to hear from the students, but I am a bit concerned that the same students that sort of inspired us to pursue this process have some concerns.
Oswald says guidelines to deal with specifics and punishments would come next.
We will be working with our students to develop those specifics, and if you look through most of the policies we have, there are accompanying guidelines that speak to that specific piece. Also, we have a student handbook, and that's where some of this really specific disciplinary consequences exist.
Both MCCSC officials and concerned students agree the policy draft is another step in an ongoing, complex process. For Indiana News Desk, I'm Patrick McGurr.
The next draft of the policy will be presented at the January school board meeting. We're joined now by Markay Winston, the assistant superintendent at MCCSC and one of the driving forces behind the policy. Welcome to the show, Dr. Winston.
Thank you very much for having me.
So is this policy where you thought it would be at this point? You know, when this whole process began, was there a timeline?
There was a timeline. When we first learned of the concerns that the students brought to us at the conclusion of the school year, we knew that over the summertime we wanted to start planning and preparing, and we began meeting with students in August to articulate what we would like to see in the new policy. And so we're really ahead of schedule in some ways in the development and presenting a draft policy to the board.
Now, were you surprised by some of the concerns raised?
I absolutely understand the concerns raised in that there's a difference in understanding between a policy and guidelines. The policy is very aspirational, and it's intended to kind of lay out where we're going to go. The development of the administrative guidelines is the next phase of that process, and that's going to take some time. And that's where the level of specificity about how will we implement the policy, that's where we'll go next. And that's going to be a really significant aspect of this process.
So that's what I was going to ask. What's the next step? So is it more fine tuning? You still have a ways to go.
So we're very excited about the completion of the policy. As we write out the administrative guidelines, that's where the specific actions around professional development, teacher training, supporting our students and helping them to know how to report, when to report, and how we're going to administer and implement the policy. So that is a significant piece of work that we will begin that work once the board approves a policy.
So how unique are policies like this? Are we able to draw from other school corporations?
Thank you for that question. We've heard that other school corporations around the country and around the state of Indiana certainly have begun to look at the development of anti-racism policies. What I think is a little bit more rare is having students' voice at the table and co-constructing the policy alongside the adults. So we feel as if we can be a role model for other school districts across the country.
And one more question, what kind of impact do you want this to have down the road when you look back at this?
We want our students to feel safe in our schools. We want them to have a trusted adult that they can go to in the event that they don't feel safe. And we want to have a clear and transparent mechanism for how they can share with us any concerns that they might have. And most importantly, we want to make sure that our adults create a culture within our schools to make sure that every student in every classroom feels safe and secure, and that they are being respected for all of their identities.
Doctor, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.